Okay, we're going to try and get going here. I'm about to do a share screen. It was hiding on me, so now I found it. Okay, welcome everyone. Tonight we're here doing the Aurora Northern Nights presentation. Tonight's presentation, as advertised, is the Star of Bethlehem, and basically what we're looking at is an astronomer's perspective of what the Star of Bethlehem may have been. So, with the Star of Bethlehem, it's probably one of the most iconic symbols recognized of the festive season. You see it on cards, treetops, everything else. And the actual Star of Bethlehem has its roots tied to the Bible. Also, it's been depicted in artwork throughout centuries, iconic images for Christmas cards and other TV shows, etc., and as well highlighted as part of the nativity scene. And there's, of course, some lighter references out there. This one sort of is one of the ones I've always been somewhat partial to. Just found it a few weeks ago and had a good giggle about it. And then there's some that are just right out in left field. Many people driving vehicles can relate to this one. So let's preface the presentation that we're about to go through. Astronomers, philosophers, and even theologians throughout history have interpreted the events linked to Matthew's account of the Star of Bethlehem and the visit of the Magi. A lot of people have asked, well, what was it? There's speculation about it being a comet, supernova, or a nova, planetary conjunctions, an angelic phenomena. Now, in this presentation, I'm not prepared to necessarily answer those questions. It's intended to be an entertaining account that ponders some of the possible astronomical explanations. So, a bit of the story background. So, let's, for this particular account, we need to step back in time, roughly 2,000 years ago, maybe a little bit more. And we're also off to the land of Judea and Babylon, back in out in the Middle East. Our script is based on or grounded on the writings of Matthew from the New Testament, and its accounts therein of the birth of Jesus and some of the events connected to it. Our story will sort of focus on his references to a star and the Magi within his written gospel. It should be noted that of all the gospels, this is the only one that actually has a reference to the Star of Bethlehem and a visit of the Magi. Now for our expose or our presentation, we're going to focus primarily on a couple of the lines within Matthew's Gospel. First one being, "For we observed his star." And a little later on in the same chapter, he talks about ahead of them went the star. So we'll just go over it. This is an old variant from the Coverdale Bible, one of the first English translations of the Greek and Hebrew Bibles into, well, they sort of say it's English, but I sort of wonder, and I sort of thought it was interesting to see how they actually wrote it out back in those days. So when Jesus was born in Beli and going on like that, I'm not even going to attempt to try and mimic Old English. And now we'll take a quicker look at one of the newer variants. Over the years, there's been multiple translations, and this is one of the later ones. It's referred to as a New Revised Standard Version, and it was published in 1989. And basically, it talks Matthew in the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea. Wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, asking, "Where is the child who has been born, King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." Then a little later on, after chatting with Herod for a bit, Matthew goes on to say, when they had heard the king, they set out, and there, ahead of them, went the star that they seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. The child, we're assuming, must have been Jesus, as the whole chapter of in Matthew is related to the birth of Jesus. Now, as part of this, there are variants in how they describe the star that they saw, or whatever precipitated them to travel. And the Old English one is, "Where is he that's born King of the Jews? For we've seen his star in the east and are come to worship him." Much later, one of the later translations, a New International Version, which was finished and published in 1965, and a lot of the people involved said that they were much better at translating from the older versions and to capture more of the nuance of what was being said. And in this version, they talk, "Where is he? Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." So now they're talking about they saw a star rising, whereas in the previous version, they said they saw a star in the east. And then the latest version, the New Revised Version, they talk about, "Where is the child who was born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." So there is some definite nuances in the various versions of the scripture. Then we look at Matthew 2:9, where they're talking about they've had their chat with King Herod, and now they're following this sign from Jerusalem down to Bethlehem, and they go, when they had heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them until it came and stood over the place where the child was. And that was from the 1535, one of the original translations. And then in 1965, it was revised to read, "After they had heard the king, they went on their way. And the star that they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was." And then in the most recent version, when they had heard the king, they set out, and there, ahead of them, went the star that they had seen at its rising until it stopped. So within this verse of Matthew, they talk about a star that's moving, went ahead of them. So starlight, star bright. So our story so far is we have some wise men from the east, and they have seen a star, and it was a sign. They've taken it as a sign of the birth of a king. The wise men traveled to Jerusalem. After chatting with Herod, the wise men were off following the star, which led them to Bethlehem, where the child was. Now, the apparent assumption is King Herod's wise men were not as astute as the visiting magi from the east. Just a bit of history is once the magi were talking to King Herod, he didn't seem to be aware of this sign that the magi had seen, nor were his advisors aware of the impending or assumed birth of a king of the in Bethlehem. Now, all of chapter 2, verses 1 through 9, there's a need to interpret them, I suppose is a way to describe it. There is definitely ambiguity in the phrasing by Matthew. A lot of them say, well, it's more likely the interpretation or the translations, but it has been problematic in trying to establish actually what Matthew is trying to convey through his scriptures. For instance, we see in Matthew 1 and 2, the star or sign was described as his star in the east, the star when it rose, and later and more recently, star at its rising. Now, if we go with the latest interpretation, his star at its rising, the magi were not likely referring to a time of day when they were talking to King Herod and saying, like, where is he, King of the Jews? We've seen his star at its rising. They were probably referring to its halical rising. And basically, that's the first time a star appears at dawn in the east, right at sunrise. It's a star that has been out of the sky for some time, and it's now reappearing predictably in the east, rising near the dawn sun. So, what is the motivation for the magi to make this arduous journey? We're talking the magi probably came from Babylon, which would be somewhere in Iraq, Iran, nowadays Iraq and Iran, and traveling to Jerusalem by camel. Probably a trip of 1.5 to 2 months. There's been references of 70 days. So the magi were probably seduced by or enticed by an event, likely astrological, and I sort of say astronomical in nature, just by the wording that was been used, his star when it rose, his star at its rising, and the star in the east. As well, the magi were supposedly following a moving object. Ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising until it stopped. Which sounds kind of strange for a star to be doing. However, the magi, based on their knowledge of astronomy, which was really good, they would have been more inclined to follow an exotic object, something not behaving as the known stars or the planetea, or planets, which were back then referred to as wandering stars. So our presentation or expose timelines. I'm just going to quickly run through these as some points of reference for determining the story and some of the assumptions that are going to be made in the upcoming portion. The date of the birth of Jesus is not stated in any of the Gospels. It's vague. Um, Based on research and everything else, most theologians and historians will agree that the birth probably happened between 7 BC and 4 BC, and possibly could vary by as much as several years earlier or later. Some scholars suggest that he was born in the spring, and a lot of that comes from a different gospel, the Gospels of Luke, where he talks about there were shepherds in the same country abiding in the fields and keeping watch by night over their flocks. Basically, shepherds back in those days, the only time that they would keep watch over their flocks in the night was when sheep were birthing, and not always happened in the spring. So they've made the assumption, well, the angels came to the shepherds and told them about the birth of the king, and they were out watching their flocks. It must have been springtime. So some additional notes for our upcoming portions. Okay, I've talked about the Magi, and they're also referred to as the three wise men. Magi were likely members of a priestly group, Bedanes or Parisians. They had developed a reputation as learned practitioners of astrology and extremely knowledgeable about stars. A lot of the history of astronomy is tied back to the writings of the Babylonian Magi. As well, Chinese astronomical recordings go back 4,000, at least to 4,000 BC, and they're considered the most extensive and accurate historical records in existence. And they've been able to basically, from Chinese records, confirm astronomical events to within a few days, even events that were happening back to 3,000 years ago. And one of the earliest observations by Chinese astronomers of a comet, for example, is in 613 BC, so almost 1,000 years before the birth of Jesus and our star Bethlehem. Okay, so what are the astronomical possibilities? We're going to look at three prevalent astronomical possibilities that I've done research on through Google to try and get an understanding myself and to do a presentation of this event. It's a yearly tour, but hey. So, comets. There are a couple of candidates, and some have been recorded by Chinese astronomers. A nova or a supernova event. These were referred to as guest stars and noted by the Babylonians, but also recorded by Chinese astronomers. And then we have the planetary conjunctions. Several significant occurrences did happen during the appropriate timelines for the birth. And it was even highlighted with the events happening actually earlier this evening, where there's a great conjunction that they refer to. A lot of people were expecting to see something as bright as the Star of Bethlehem, and were probably a bit disappointed. So the first one is the comet scenario. Here is a photograph of one of the most recent ones, Comet Neowise. happened earlier this year, taken in southern British Columbia. So, quickly, comet is an icy object that comes from the far reaches of the outer solar system, either the Kuiper Belt or the Oort cloud, and they come screaming in with a fair amount of regularity. Basically, they're on an elliptical orbit, which swings them close to the sun on through as part of its orbit. As it gets closer to the sun, it starts to melt. Escaping gas and dust forms a glowing tail stretching across the sky for weeks or months. So, we're talking about something that is quite noticeable. Comets have a tendency to hang in the sky for extended periods of time, weeks or months, as they pass near Earth. Now, according to Chinese and Korean records, 2 comets appeared in a period, or in the timelines of the birth of Jesus, one in 5 BC and another in 4 BC. So here's another photograph of Neowise. This one was, I think, taken just north of Los Angeles. This was a comet about, well, 2007. Comet McNaught. Its main features were actually best seen in the southern hemisphere. Another popular comet of almost 20 years ago was Hale-Bopp, which was around for quite some time. Here's a photograph of it actually over the pyramids in Egypt. And this one was taken a little closer to home for us. So let's look at the 5 BC comet candidate. So I'm not even going to try and pronounce it. I'm sorry. A broom star was recorded in Chinese texts and observed in 5 BC. Observed in the constellation of Capricornus, March and April, and it was visible for about 70 days. So here is an actual depiction from the chronicles where it was recorded. And then that basically translated as, during the intervals between March and April of 5 BC, a comet that was visible for more than 70 days appeared close to Alpha and Beta Capricornia. Those are 2 stars within the constellation of Capricorn. This candidate, it matches well with the assumed dates for his birth, generally calculated around 4 BC, so he falls within that several year margin that has been accepted as well. The 70 days that it was visible provided ample time for the Magi to travel from Babylon to Herod's court and then on to Bethlehem while it was still in the sky. The Christian scholar and theologian Origen suggested that the Bethlehem star might have been a comet, and this was back in 248 AD. For interest point purposes, Origen was later tried for heresy, because to say that the Bible was writings in the Bible may not be quite a true account was considered heresy, and he was later put to death. Okay, so according to the Chinese records, this comet was there for about 70 days. I've just noted the two stars that Alpha Capricorni, or a more common name is Aligidi, and Beta Debe, whatever. The reason I pointed these out is this is a star map of from Stellarium of the sky taken in Iran around 5 BC. Night sky, 5 April BC. Okay, so there's our two stars, and I've included the outlines of the various constellations. So the area of the comet would have been in and around those two particular stars. And here is a map of the night sky, same time in Fort Smith. Just thought it'd be of interest. As you can see, the stars are much further north, so the stars are much closer. Those particular stars are much closer to the horizon. Now, unfortunately, a comet is an unlikely candidate for star Bethlehem. Yes, I know I just made a good case for it there, but mainly the perception of comets in ancient times was not a good one. It was an alleged evil omen, premonitions of death and destruction. And a lot of people feel that it's unlikely the Magi would associate a comet with the birth of a king, which they were going to pay homage to. So the comet of 5 and 4 BC were observed near Capricornus. The Chinese did not note any apparent movement of it. It moved only a couple of degrees in the night sky, whereas other comets move from almost one side of the sky to the other over their period of being observed. Now, we did make reference of 5 and 4 BC, and there's a fairly good case out there that they were likely the same comet, and that the Koreans weren't as good mathematicians as the Chinese and made an error in their date. And as well, the constellation of Capricornus doesn't have a significant astrological prominence. And it was really unlikely to motivate the Magi to make an arduous and grueling trip of 70 days through the desert. Here are some classic portrayals of your comets. Here's a nativity scene, and above it you can see there's a comet or something. Interpretations was it was a painting of a comet over the nativity scene. Here's another classic that you see on many cards, Christmas cards and things. A star with a tail, which really sounds like a comet. This is the Bow Tapestry from 1066 AD. It's a huge long tapestry, and this shows a portion of the tapestry where it's depicting the Halley's Comet. And again, it's not taken in the best of light. Death of a king. There's some Chinese, the Chinese silk book from 300 BC. Each one of the items here is a comet with notations about the comet. Most of them were negative. They were talking like rebellion in the States, death among generals, disease in the world. So, yeah, just not a good option. A lot of the people researching it just feel that the comet doesn't fill in that well. So let's look at the next one, a nova or supernova option. A nova or supernova is basically a star exploding at the end of its life. Something like that. Here's a depiction of what the constellation of Orion will look like once Betelgeuse, which was being purported last year to be going supernova, just going through one of its many phases of teasing us. It will go supernova, but timelines for that is today or 100,000 years from now. Okay, so a nova is a star that rapidly increases in brightness. What it was is likely a star that was previously too dim to be seen and suddenly becomes one of the brightest stars in the sky. It's a transient event where a bright new star appears, brightens, and then slowly fades over several weeks or months. A supernova, much like a nova, but as implied by super, much more impressive. And they are astronomically and physics, much different events. Nova and supernova were referred to as guest stars by ancient observers. Like I said, all of a sudden this star would appear, stay around for a while, and then fade away to oblivion. And similar to comets, they sort of just hung there, but with no real apparent movement other than the same movement that the background stars would portray. So with the supernova, nova is a probable case of mistaken identity. Now, there's been suggestions that the comets that the Chinese and Koreans saw in 4 and 5 BC were actually a nova rather than a comet. The rationale for that is there was no recorded movement or very little recorded movement of the comet. And like we say, comets are a very fast moving object that's coming into our sun and then zooming back out to the outer solar system. So it's definitely moving, and there should be apparent movement. Now, over the eons, there's only been 8 naked eye nova supernova events that have been reliably recorded in history. First one recorded accurately was recorded in 185 AD by Chinese observers. And the most recent one that was visible was in 1604, the Kepler supernova. Now there was, like I say, the 8 in between, and here is one, a supernova in 1572. Now this isn't the star exploding, it's referred to as a supernova remnant. It's what's visible today, some 400 years afterwards, 500 years afterwards. So in 1572, Danish astronomer spotted a brilliant new star named Cassiopeia. In the following days, it became brighter than Venus, shone through the blue daytime sky for 2 weeks, and basically took 16 months to completely fade away. So here's a star map showing, as you can see, Cassiopeia up there, the night sky, and this is if you happen to be around Fort Smith in 1572. And this is a point you want to keep your eye on for the next slide. So this is a simulation from October through November. As you can see, it came out of the nowhere and became a very, very bright star. Okay, so here's supernova remnant 185. This is the first sort of one that was reliably documented by the Chinese. And it's still visible. The remnant's still visible. The actual supernova itself was visible in the night sky for 8 months. And I said first one. So in the second year of the epoch of whoever, a strange star appeared in the middle of the non-moon Centaurus constellation and was like a large bamboo mat. It displayed 5 colors, both pleasing and otherwise, and gradually lessened. In the 6th month of the succeeding year, it disappeared. However, academics don't think it was really a supernova. Some of the rationale for that is there's no recorded observations of an event that would have been seen throughout the world and most definitely recorded by Chinese observers and probably even Babylonian Magi. They've been able to find no remnants of a stellar explosion from that particular timeline, and they're able to fairly well date supernova remnants and planetary nebulas. And then, for example, at its peak, Kepler's supernova, the one in 1604, was brighter than any planet or star in the night sky and was visible in the blue of the daytime for over 3 weeks. So it was an exceptionally bright one. And it gets back to there was no real record of this by the Chinese of any really, really bright exploding guest star or exploding event in the timelines of 7 to 0 BC. And this is another simulation of a supernova event. And this would be over the period of months as the cloud of gas slowly expands. You can see by the movement of the stars in the background and things. Okay, so now the final thing that we're going to look at is the comet planetary conjunction affairs. So our planetary conjunction concept. Planets were referred to as wandering stars of the night sky. Astrologers, including the Magi, tracked the movement of these messengers as they traversed the constellations and interpreted potential meanings. We have to sort of acknowledge that back in the Dark Ages, astrology was actually considered a science. Oh, I can see the hate mail coming tomorrow. There were several impressive conjunctions during the timelines of Jesus' birth, and they involved significantly important constellations. As planets orbit around the sun, they may from time to time appear to approach each other, drawing closer over the days and before separating. And this is just the mechanics of objects orbiting the sun or another celestial object. So, interpretation of the planetary conjunctions. Okay, so first, the The visible outer planets, and that's specifically Saturn and Jupiter, um, because they're further out and we're inside their orbit, a lot of times they will appear to, as they're going across their night sky, they will continue across the night sky, and then they'll come to a stop and start moving back in the opposite direction. And this happens over a period of many weeks. And this is from the observer's perspective. Whereas you have your inner planets, Mercury and Venus, they're quite consistent. They're either a morning star or an evening star, and they're always associated either with sunset or sunrise. And they never, they have very predictable paths across the sky, and they never seem to backtrack. For the Magi, planets and constellations influenced particular events and persons or personas. Jupiter was tied to royalty, while Saturn was a symbol of the giving of life. You look at constellations such as Pisces, was particularly tied to the house of Jacob and the Jewish tribe. The Magi and astrologers, I put in May, they did interpret alignments that occurred as signals that there was newborn rulers in Judea for this particular instance, and other notable events. They try and tie, like eclipses were tied to the death of Herod and things like that, foretelling the death of Herod. And yeah, an interesting science. So let's look at the 7 BCE or 7 BC planetary conjunction. It was a triple planetary conjunction. It involves the constellation Pisces as well, which is associated with Jewish people in astrology. So when Jupiter and Saturn passed very close to each other 3 times in the span of several months, it was noted and considered notable. The first of this triple conjunction occurred in late May. A lot of scholars suggest that the Magi probably started their journey or may have started their journey at this time. The second one occurred in late September, which would have been about the time that they had reached Jerusalem and were talking to Herod and things like that. And I don't know why they would have hung around till December, but hey, we'll go with the flow. The third one appeared in December after Herod had sent them on their way. So this is what it would have looked like when we have Jupiter and Saturn very close together, probably a couple of degrees apart. And here is your constellation of Pisces. This is the one from September. The previous one was the May sort of conjunction, and again we see they're back very close together and still hanging around in the constellation of Pisces. But as we're moving into later into the summer, their positioning has changed somewhat. And then in December, again, they're still near Pisces. However, they've moved much more to the south, which is just coincides with the direction Bethlehem is from Jerusalem. Here's another sort of depiction of planetary alignments that happened the following year. And in this one, we have Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn. Again, 3 very significant planets. and again in the constellation of Pisces. And this is a couple of months later, just before sunrise. And again, it's even, we've got Venus, Saturn, the moon, and Jupiter all congregating. And again, here we have your constellation of Pisces. The next one is a planetary conjunction of fairly significant proportions. Happened in 2 BC. In this one, we have the meeting of Jupiter and Venus taking place in the constellation of Leo the Lion, another constellation directly tied to the Jewish people. And it also happened very close to the star Regulus within Leo. Also, the star Regulus is very much, a lot of people refer to it as the king's star, so identified with kingship. There hasn't been a brighter or closer conjunction of Venus and Jupiter in Leo near Regulus since that happened over 2,000 years ago. Now, astrologers would have associated Jupiter with the birth of the king and Venus with fertility. So basically having Jupiter and Venus associating with a star of kings is screams out birth of king. So here is a screenshot from Stellarium from August 1st, 2 BC. Down here we have Jupiter. Up here we have Venus. And in this particular one, Regulus isn't even in the picture yet. So now we're going to go through a 2.5 month thing where you can see Venus moving quite quickly through the night sky, as it should. You have Jupiter, we have Regulus here, you've got the moon screaming through. Jupiter and Regulus coming together pretty well. Jupiter scooting by, and wait a moment, I got to do this again. Jupiter actually goes into a retrograde and starts going back towards Regulus, but by then my script had run out. So, planetary conjunctions, plausible. But I sort of I'm a bit skeptic as well, as exhibited by, if people had an opportunity this evening, there was a great conjunction. We had Jupiter and Saturn close together, the closest they've been in 800 years, and the closest they'll be in quite some time. The TVs and internet were abound with stories of this great bright star that was going to appear, and well, some of us were less than impressed. Now, if we look at a planetary junction between Jupiter and Venus, which sort of refers to the one of the 2 BC planetary conjunction, much more impressive. Venus is being the brightest object in the sky next to the moon, and Jupiter probably the third brightest after the moon and Venus. Them coming close together probably would have been more impressive, but I don't think it's this gargantuan star that's 1,000 times brighter than all the other stars. There's also the astrological connections of the conjunctions, and this is probably what really influenced the the Magi to travel more than an actual, wow, look at that bright star or that bright conjunction. It was just the stars being in a certain constellation in association with other very significant astrological signs, i.e. Jupiter, Regulus, both king related to the royalty and kings, Venus, fertility, um, and just things like that. Okay, so some notes to ponder. Okay, I'm not going to rule out that it couldn't have been a divine conjecture. You got to remember, when the Magi showed up, Harold really had no idea what they were really talking about, referring to the birth of a king. He had to summon his advisors. The advisors were the ones that sort of reminded Herod of the prophecy Messiah would be born in Bethlehem, and that sort of, I guess, led to the next leg of the trip from Jerusalem to Bethlehem for the Magi. If the birth of Christ had been marked by a spectacular astronomical event, Herod would have probably understood the reference to the star. It seemed only the Magi were excited by a significant astronomical event. So, getting back to it, maybe the Magi were a lot better than the Roman wise men in their understanding of astronomy and astrology and our night sky, and more astute to observing events that are happening, catching things like the helical rising of certain stars in the morning, in the dawn. Okay, so here's a sort of a final Christmas inspiration. This is a photograph of the Anglican Church in Lunenburg, burnt down sometime, I think, in 1930s or something. It was a huge fire, and it was being rebuilt. And as part of the rebuilding process, they were taking a second look at this part of the ceiling, sort of near the altar. Previously, it had been dotted with 700 gold stars. Initially, they were saying, "Oh, just throw some stars up there," and then when they started looking at them, they determined, hey, these haven't been randomly placed. And after looking at photographs and things, they were able to determine that what had actually been depicted and put up on this ceiling in 1752, I think is the date. I got something blocking my screen there. Was actually the sky in Lunenburg, basically on the 0 BC, the night that Jesus would have been thought to have been born. In other words, first Christmas. I think some priest and his followers sat there and figured out from what they saw of the night sky and figure out all the calculations to be able to figure out this is what it looked like 1,700 years earlier. There would have been some significant changes as through progressions and things like that. So thought it might inspire people. Okay, final scenes for you. This is what our night sky will look like at Christmas Eve here in Fort Smith. This is looking south. So you've got constellation Orion, the moon, Mars. So Should be a nice sky to look at. And this is what it would have looked like Christmas Day, the night of Jesus was born. A little bit different than now, as you can see, Orion's way over. So the sky does change over time. And that concludes the presentation. I'd like to extend wishing all the very best during the festive season. And one of my favorite quotes would have been made 3 nights from now, back in 1968, from Apollo 8, as they were orbiting the moon on Christmas Eve. They went, say, we close with good night, good luck, Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth. And that is it. Now I just got to figure out, stop sharing, okay.